The space station called Helix 7 floated in the darkness between stars. It was a huge structure made of metal and glass, spinning slowly in the endless void. Thousands of beings lived and worked there. Aliens from 12 different species walked its halls, traded goods, made deals, and sometimes caused trouble. Humans were the newest species on the station. They had only been part of the galactic community for 30 years, and most aliens still saw them as children who did not belong among the stars. Grace Park was one of those humans. She was 19 years old, small in size, with dark hair that she kept tied back in a simple ponytail. Her hands were rough from work, and her fingernails were always dirty with grease and oil. She worked as a mechanic in the lower maintenance decks of the station, fixing pipes, replacing broken parts, and keeping the old machines running. It was hard work that nobody else wanted to do. The lower decks were dark, cold, and far away from the nice areas where the wealthy aliens lived and played. Grace did not mind the darkness or the cold. She had grown up poor on Earth, in a small apartment where the heating often broke down. She was used to being uncomfortable. She was used to being ignored. On Helix 7, most aliens looked right through her as if she did not exist. To them, she was just another weak human doing a job that was beneath them. That was fine with Grace. She did not need their attention. She just needed their money every month. Grace sent most of her pay back to Earth. Her mother was sick, and medicine was expensive. Her younger brother was still in school, and someone had to pay for his books and food. Grace had taken this job because it paid well, even if it meant living alone on a space station full of beings who thought she was nothing. She told herself it was only for 2 more years. 2 more years, and her contract would end. She could go home. She could see her family again. She just had to survive until then. On that night, Grace was working alone in Sector 9. It was the deepest part of the maintenance level, a maze of pipes and machines that groaned and hissed like living things. The air smelled like metal and chemicals. The lights above her head flickered sometimes, casting strange shadows on the walls. Grace was used to it. She had worked in Sector 9 many times before. She was fixing a broken valve when she first noticed something wrong. The small screen on her wrist, which showed her the station systems, started to flash. The surveillance cameras in her sector were failing. One by one, their signals disappeared from her screen. Grace frowned and tapped the screen. Sometimes, the old equipment acted up. Sometimes, a solar flare caused interference. But this was different. The cameras were not just having problems. They were being turned off. Someone was doing this on purpose. A cold feeling spread through her chest. Grace stood up slowly and looked around. The maintenance bay was large and filled with shadows. Huge machines rose up around her like sleeping giants. There were many places to hide. Many places for something to wait. She reached for her communicator to call for help. But before she could press the button, the lights went out. Not just dimmed. They went completely dark. For a moment, Grace stood in total blackness, her heart beating fast in her chest. Then the emergency lights came on. They were red and weak, barely bright enough to see by. Everything looked like it was covered in blood. The shadows became deeper and darker. The machines around her looked like monsters now, their shapes twisted by the strange light. Grace heard footsteps. Heavy footsteps. More than one set. They were coming from the direction of the exit. She backed away slowly, her eyes searching the darkness. Her mind was racing. Who would turn off the cameras? Who would cut the lights? This was not an accident. This was planned. Someone had been waiting for this moment. 3 figures stepped out of the shadows. They were Calvari. Grace recognized them at once. The Calvari were one of the most feared species in the galaxy. They were tall, much taller than any human, with bodies covered in hard exoskeletons that looked like natural armor. Their arms ended in claws that could cut through metal. Their eyes glowed faintly in the red light, like embers from a dying fire. Grace had seen cavalry before, but always from a distance. She had heard stories about them. They were warriors, mercenaries, killers for hire. They hated humans more than most aliens did. They said humans were weak, soft, and did not deserve to be among the stars. Some cavalry had made it their mission to prove this, by hunting humans whenever they could. The largest of the three stepped forward. His exoskeleton was scarred from many battles. His eyes burned with hatred. "Look what we found," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. A little human, all alone in the dark. The second cavalry laughed. It was an ugly sound, like metal scraping against metal. No one to help her. No one to hear her scream. The third one moved to block the only exit. He was the biggest of them all, a wall of armor and muscle. The cameras are dead. The communications are jammed. No witnesses. No way out. Grace felt her back touch the cold wall behind her. There was nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. She was trapped with three killers who wanted her dead simply because she was human. The first cavalry, the one with the scarred armor, walked toward her slowly. He was enjoying this. He wanted her to feel afraid. He wanted her to beg. "Humans think they belong in space," he said. "They think they are special. But they are nothing. They are prey. And tonight, little human, you will learn what happens to prey when the predators come." Grace's hands were shaking. Her legs felt weak. Every part of her body screamed at her to run, to cry, to fall to her knees and beg for mercy. This was fear. True fear. The kind of fear that her ancestors had felt when they faced lions on the African plains, when they huddled in caves while wolves howled outside. But those ancestors had survived. They had faced the lions and the wolves and the ice and the darkness, and they had survived. That was why Grace existed, because millions of years of terror had created something in humans, something that woke up when death came close. Grace felt that something stir inside her now. Her hands stopped shaking. Her breathing became slow and steady. The fear did not go away, but it changed. It became cold. It became sharp. It became a tool. She looked at the three killers standing before her, and for the first time, she really saw the room around her. The machines, the pipes, the chemicals, the tools. The cavalry saw a helpless girl. They did not see the trap they had walked into. The three cavalry moved slowly, spreading out to surround Grace. They were in no hurry. They had done this before, many times. They knew how prey behaved. First came the fear. Then came the begging. Then came the crying. And finally, when all hope was gone, came the silence. The sweet silence of surrender. The scarred one was their leader. His name was Vorn, and he had killed more humans than he could count. To him, humans were like insects. Crushing them brought him joy. He had waited a long time for this chance. The cameras in Sector 9 had been a problem for months, always watching, always recording. But Vorn had paid good money to a station technician to make them fail at just the right moment. Now, there would be no evidence, no witnesses, just another human who disappeared in the lower decks. Vorn looked at the small human girl pressed against the wall. She was tiny, barely reaching his chest. Her skin was soft and unprotected. She had no claws, no armor, no natural weapons of any kind. How did such weak creatures ever survive on their home world? It was a mystery Vorn did not care to solve. He only cared about the fear in her eyes. But wait, where was the fear? Vorn stopped walking and looked more closely at the human. Her eyes were open wide, yes, but they were not filled with terror. They were moving, scanning, looking at everything around her. Looking at him, looking at his brothers, looking at the machines and pipes. She was thinking. Planning.vorn felt a small flash of surprise, but he pushed it away. It did not matter what the human was thinking. She was small and weak. She had no weapons. She was alone against 3 Kalvari warriors. There was nothing she could do. "You are quiet, little human," Vorn said, stepping closer. "Most of your kind scream and beg by now. Are you too scared to speak?" Grace looked at him. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "I was just wondering something." Vorn tilted his head. This was new. Humans usually could not form words at this point. "Wondering what?" "How you got so ugly," Grace said. "Was it an accident, or were you born that way?" For a moment, there was silence. Then Drax, the second Kalvari, made a sound of disbelief. "Did she just insult you?" Malik, the huge one blocking the exit, growled low in his throat. The little creature has lost her mind from fear. But Vorn did not laugh. He stared at the human girl with new interest. She was not acting like prey. She was acting like something else. Something that did not make sense. "You are brave," Vorn said slowly. "Or stupid. It does not matter. The result will be the same." He raised one massive claw and examined it in the red light. The edges gleamed like knives. "Do you know what these can do, human? I once cut a Kalvari warrior in half with a single strike. Your soft body will split open like fruit." Grace watched the claw but did not flinch. Her mind was working faster than had ever worked before. She saw the maintenance bay with new eyes now, not as a workplace, but as a battlefield. Every tool, every machine, every pipe and wire was a potential weapon. The Kalvari were bigger and stronger, but they were not smarter. They could not be. If they were smart, they would have killed her already instead of talking. "Your kind has a saying," Vorn continued, walking closer. "What is it?" "Ah, yes. Like a lamb to the slaughter. That is what you are, little human. A lamb. And we are the wolves." Grace took a slow breath. Her eyes found what she was looking for. A plasma cutter on a workbench to her left. A pressurized coolant line above Drex's head. An electrical junction panel near the far wall. A chemical storage rack behind Malik. The pieces of a plan began to form in her mind. "You talk a lot for wolves," Grace said. "On Earth, real wolves don't waste time talking. They just hunt." Drex hissed with anger. "This one needs to learn respect." "She will learn," Vorn said. "They all learn in the end." He was close now, only a few steps away. Grace could smell him, a sharp scent like burning metal. His eyes glowed brighter as his excitement grew. He was going to enjoy this. He wanted to take his time, to make her suffering last. That was his mistake. "Before you kill me," Grace said, her voice still calm, "can I ask you one question?" Vorn paused. He was amused by her strange behavior. "Ask? Have you ever seen what a human can do when they have nothing to lose?" Vorn laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bay. "I have seen humans die. That is all your kind knows how to do." Grace shook her head slowly. "No, you have seen humans give up. That is different. When a human gives up, they are easy to kill. But when a human decides to fight, really fight, with everything they have." She met his eyes directly. There was something in her gaze that made Vorn feel strange. It was not fear. It was not courage. It was something older. Something that had been born in caves and forests long ago. When humans were not the masters of their world, but the survivors of it. When a human decides to fight, Grace continued, they become the most dangerous animal in the galaxy. Your people hunt for sport. My people hunted to survive. For millions of years, everything on our planet tried to kill us. The weather, the animals, the diseases, even each other. And we are still here. Do you know why? Vorn said nothing. For the first time, he felt uncertain. Because we never stopped fighting, Grace said. Because we would rather die on our feet than live on our knees. Because when you push a human into a corner, when you take away all their options, they don't break. They become something else. Something you have never seen before. She smiled then, and it was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator. You made a mistake tonight, Grace said. You thought you were hunting prey, but you walked into a cage with something much worse. Vorn roared and lunged at her, his claws slashing through the air. But Grace was already moving. Grace dropped to the floor half a second before Vorn's claws reached her. She felt the air move above her head as his strike passed through empty space. The sound of his claws hitting the metal wall behind her was like thunder. Sparks flew in all directions, but she did not waste time looking back. Her body moved on instinct, rolling sideways under a heavy workbench. Her hand shot out and grabbed the plasma cutter she had seen earlier. It was a maintenance tool, not a weapon, but it would have to do. Vorn pulled his claws free from the wall with a screech of torn metal. His eyes burned with rage. You dare to run? You cannot escape. Grace was already on her feet on the other side of the workbench. Her thumb found the power switch on the plasma cutter. The tool hummed to life, its tip glowing bright blue with intense heat. She had used this tool 1,000 times to cut through pipes and plates. She knew exactly what it could do. Drex was moving toward her from the left. He was faster than Vorn, his body leaner and built for speed. His claws clicked against the metal floor as he approached. Nowhere to run, little human. The exit is blocked. You are trapped. I know, Grace said. She raised the plasma cutter and swept it in a wide arc. Not at Drex. At the pipes above his head, the pressurized coolant line exploded. Liquid nitrogen, stored at temperatures far below freezing, burst out in a cloud of white mist. The cloud engulfed Drex completely. The temperature dropped so fast that frost formed on every surface within meters. Drex screamed. The liquid nitrogen hit his exoskeleton and flash froze it solid. The joints of his armor, designed to flex and move, locked in place as ice formed in every gap and crack. He tried to take a step and fell, his legs unable to bend. He crashed to the floor like a statue pushed from a shelf. Drex! Malik roared from his position at the exit. He started moving toward his fallen brother, forgetting for a moment about the human girl. That was his mistake. Grace was already running. Not toward the exit, which Malik had left unguarded in his confusion, but toward the electrical junction panel on the far wall. Her boots pounded against the metal floor. Her lungs burned with cold air. Behind her, she heard Vorn recovering, his claws scraping as he gave chase. He was fast. Too fast. Grace felt him getting closer with every step. The junction panel was still too far away. She made a decision in a split second. She turned and threw the plasma cutter directly at Malik's face. It spun through the air, trailing blue light. The throw was not meant to hurt him. His armor would protect him from a small tool like that. But it made him flinch. It made him raise his arms to protect his eyes. It gave Grace 2 more seconds. 2 seconds was enough. Vorn caught up to her just as she reached the junction panel. His claw came down in a vicious strike aimed at her back. Grace twisted at the last moment, but she was not fast enough. The claw tore through her jacket and into her shoulder. Pain exploded through her body, hot and sharp. Blood splashed across the metal wall. Grace screamed. The pain was beyond anything she had felt before. Her vision went white for a moment, and she almost fell. But her hands found the junction panel. Her fingers, slippery with her own blood, gripped the cover and pulled. Die! Vorn bellowed, raising his claw for another strike. Grace ripped the panel open. Inside was a mess of wires and circuits, the heart of the electrical system for this section of the deck. She knew this system. She had repaired it many times. She knew which wires to pull, which connections to make. She jammed her bloody hand into the panel and grabbed a handful of wires. With one savage pull, she tore them free and crossed them together. The effect was immediate. The metal floor of the maintenance bay came alive with electricity. The current that normally powered the lights and machines surged through the deck plates. Grace had jumped at the last second, grabbing onto the plastic-coated frame of the panel to keep herself off the floor. Vorn was not so lucky. The electricity hit him like a wave. His exoskeleton, made of metal compounds designed to stop blades and bullets, conducted the current straight into his body. His muscles locked. His eyes went wide. A horrible sound came from his throat as thousands of volts passed through him. He fell. His body hit the floor with a heavy crash, still twitching as the electricity continued to flow. Smoke rose from the joints of his armor. The smell of burning filled the air. Grace hung from the panel, her wounded shoulder screaming with pain. Blood ran down her arm and dripped onto the electrified floor below, sizzling where it landed. She could not hold on much longer. Her fingers were slipping. Malik stood at the edge of the electrified area, his eyes wide with shock and rage. He had seen his two brothers fall in less than a minute. This could not be happening. This was impossible. She was just a human. A small, weak human. What are you? He whispered. Grace looked at him. Her face was pale from blood loss. Her body was shaking from pain and exhaustion, but her eyes were still burning with that same cold fire. "I am human," she said, "and you have no idea what that means." The electrical surge ended as circuit breakers kicked in somewhere in the station. The floor became safe again. Grace dropped down, her legs almost giving out beneath her. She stumbled but stayed standing. Malik was the last one, the biggest one. And now he was angry. He charged at her with a roar that shook the walls. Grace smiled and reached for the chemical storage rack behind her. The night was not over yet. Malik was the largest of the three cavalry. He stood over 2 meters tall, and his body was covered in the thickest armor Grace had ever seen. His arms were like tree trunks, ending in claws that could crush stone. When he charged, the floor shook beneath his weight. Grace had only seconds to act. Her wounded shoulder was useless now, hanging at her side and dripping blood. The pain was a constant scream in her mind, but she pushed it away. Pain was just information. It was telling her that her body was damaged. She already knew that. What mattered now was survival. The chemical storage rack stood behind her, filled with tanks of industrial solvents, cleaning agents, and repair compounds. She knew what was in each tank. She had used them all before. One tank in particular caught her attention. It was marked with warning symbols in 3 different languages. Industrial acid, used to strip rust and corrosion from old metal. It could eat through most materials in seconds. Grace grabbed the tank with her good hand. It was heavy, but fear and desperation gave her strength she did not know she had. She swung the tank just as Malik reached her. The tank hit his chest and broke open. Malik's armor was designed to stop claws and bullets. It was not designed to stop acid. The industrial solvent splashed across his chest and shoulders, immediately beginning to eat through the outer layer of his exoskeleton. Smoke rose as the chemical reaction began. Malik stumbled back, looking down at his chest with disbelief. "What? What is this?" He gasped. The acid spread, finding every crack and gap in his armor. It seeped through the joints and touched the softer tissue beneath. Malik screamed, a sound of pure agony that echoed through the maintenance bay. He clawed at his own chest, trying to wipe away the burning liquid, but he only spread it to his hands. Grace did not stop to watch. She was already climbing, pulling herself up the maintenance scaffolding with her one good arm. Every movement sent waves of pain through her body. Her vision was getting dark around the edges. She was losing too much blood. She needed to end this quickly, or she would not survive. Drex was starting to move below. The liquid nitrogen had frozen his armor, but cavalry were tough creatures. His body heat was slowly warming the ice. Soon he would break free. Grace could see him struggling, hear the crack of ice as his joints began to bend again. She reached the top of the scaffolding and looked down. The overhead crane hung above the center of the bay, used to move heavy equipment and salvage. It was currently holding a load of scrap metal, waiting to be processed. The load must have weighed at least 2 tons. Grace crawled along the scaffolding toward the crane controls. Her blood left a trail behind her, dark red against the gray metal. Her body was failing. She could feel it. But she was not done yet. "You cannot run forever, human," Malik roared from below. Half his armor had been eaten away by the acid. His chest was exposed, raw and bleeding. But he was still standing, still fighting. "I will tear you apart. I will make you suffer for what you have done." "Come and get me," Grace whispered. She reached the crane controls. They were simple, designed for workers wearing thick gloves. A lever to move the crane. A button to release the load. She positioned herself and waited. Below, Drex finally broke free. His armor was cracked and damaged from the extreme cold, but he was moving again. He looked around, saw Vaughan's smoking body on the floor, saw Malik's acid-eaten form, and then looked up. His eyes found Grace on the scaffolding. "There!" he shouted. "She is up there." Malik looked up. His eyes burned with hatred. "Nowhere to run now, little human. Nowhere to hide." They both began to climb the scaffolding from different sides. Their claws dug into the metal frame, pulling their heavy bodies upward. They were slower than before, wounded and damaged, but they were still coming. 2 killers, closing in from both directions. Grace watched them climb. Her hand rested on the crane controls. She waited until they were directly below the suspended load of scrap metal, until there was no way for them to escape. "My people have a saying," Grace said, her voice weak but clear. "What does not kill you makes you stronger." "Do you know what that means?" Malik snarled. "It means nothing. Words of weaklings. It means we learn from pain," Grace said. "Every wound teaches us. Every defeat makes us better. For millions of years, we faced things that should have destroyed us. Ice ages that froze our world. Plagues that killed millions. Predators with claws and teeth. And every single time, we survived. We adapted. We became stronger." She pulled the lever and pressed the button. The crane released its load. 2 tons of scrap metal fell straight down onto Drex and Malik. They had no time to react, no time to escape. The mass of metal crashed into them with a sound like the end of the world. The scaffolding shook. Dust and debris filled the air. When the dust cleared, Grace looked down. Malik and Drex were buried under the pile of metal. They were not moving. She had won. Grace sat back against the railing of the scaffolding. Her body was finished. She had nothing left. The pain from her shoulder had become a distant thing, like something happening to someone else. She knew that was a bad sign. She was going into shock. If help did not come soon, she would die up here, alone in the dark. But she had won. 3 cavalry warriors, the most feared killers in the galaxy. Defeated by one small human girl with nothing but maintenance tools and the will to survive. Grace laughed weakly. It hurt to laugh, but she did not care. "Not bad," she whispered to herself. "Not bad for a lamb." She closed her eyes and waited for whatever came next. The backup systems finally came online 30 minutes later. Somewhere in the upper decks, an alarm began to sound. The station's computers had detected multiple system failures in Sector 9. They had also detected biological readings that suggested violence. Security was dispatched immediately. David Kim was the first to arrive. He was the chief of security for the lower decks, a Korean-American man in his 40s with gray hair and tired eyes. He had worked on Helix 7 for 15 years and thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. The maintenance bay looked like a war zone. Scorch marks covered the walls. Frost still clung to some surfaces while others were melted and twisted. The floor was stained with blood, both red and the dark purple of Kolvari. Broken equipment lay everywhere. The smell of burned metal and chemicals hung heavy in the air. And in the middle of it all, 3 of the most dangerous mercenaries in the galaxy lay defeated. David found Vorn first. The Kolvari leader was still alive, barely, his body burned from the electrical surge. He was mumbling something about a demon, a monster in human form. David called for medical teams and moved on. Malik and Drex were under the pile of scrap metal. Drex was dead, his cracked armor finally giving way under the weight. Malik was alive, but would never fight again. His body was broken in a dozen places. Then David looked up and saw the girl. Grace was sitting on the scaffolding above, leaning against the railing. Her eyes were closed. Her skin was pale as paper. Blood had soaked through her jacket and dripped down through the metal grating. For a terrible moment, David thought she was dead. Then she opened her eyes. "Hey," Grace said weakly. "Took you long enough." David climbed up to her as fast as he could. His hand shook as he applied emergency bandages to her shoulder. The wound was deep and serious, but she was still breathing. She was still alive. What happened here? David asked. His voice was not steady. Grace looked at him with eyes that seemed very old for someone so young. "They thought I was easy prey," she said simply. "They were wrong." The medical teams arrived and took Grace away on a stretcher. She lost consciousness before they reached the medical bay. The doctor said later that she should have died. The blood loss alone should have killed her. The shock should have killed her. The pain should have made her pass out long before she finished fighting. But somehow, she had kept going. Somehow, she had survived. Word spread quickly on the station. Within hours, everyone knew what had happened in Sector 9. A young human girl, alone and unarmed, had defeated 3 Kolvari warriors. The story seemed impossible. Many did not believe it at first. Then the video was recovered. The cameras had been disabled, but they had recorded data for a short time before going completely dark. The station's technicians managed to recover fragments of footage. It was broken and unclear, but it showed enough. It showed Grace moving through the bay, using everything around her as a weapon. It showed her setting traps, creating distractions, fighting with a fury and intelligence that no alien had ever expected from a human. The footage spread across the galactic network within days. Billions of beings watched the small human girl fight for her life against impossible odds. They watched her bleed and suffer. They watched her refuse to give up. They watched her win. The response was immediate. The Kolvari Consortium issued a formal statement expressing regret for the actions of their citizens. They paid damages to Grace and her family. They promised to punish those who had planned the attack. It was the first time in history that the Kolvari had ever apologized to humans. Other species began to look at humans differently. For 30 years, they had seen humans as the galaxy's children, weak and unimportant. Now they saw something else. They saw a species that did not know how to give up. A species that would fight with their last breath. A species that was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. At the Galactic Federation Council, the human ambassador was asked to speak about what had happened. Representatives from a dozen species watched as he stood before them. "We have all seen the footage," said a delegate from the marine species, his blue skin dark with unease. How did one human girl defeat 3 Kalvari warriors? What are you people? The ambassador smiled. He was an older man with white hair and calm eyes, but there was steel beneath his gentle manner. We are the children of Earth, he said. A world that tried to kill us every single day for 4 billion years. We survived ice ages that covered our planet in frozen death. We survived plagues that killed half our population. We survived predators with teeth and claws far greater than our own. And we survived ourselves, which was perhaps the hardest thing of all. He paused, letting his words sink in. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the fastest or the toughest. But we are the most stubborn. We do not give up. We do not surrender. When you push us into a corner, we do not break. We become something else. Something that has been forged by millions of years of struggle and death. Something that will never stop fighting until the fight is over. He looked around the council chamber, meeting the eyes of beings who had dismissed humanity for decades. Grace Park is not special, he continued. She is not a superhuman or a freak. She is ordinary. Every single human on every single world would have done the same thing in her place. Because that is what we are. That is what Earth made us. And if you ever forget that, if you ever think we are weak and easy to break, his smile faded. Remember the girl in Sector 9. Remember what she did to 3 of the galaxy's most feared warriors with nothing but tools and determination. And remember that there are 8 billion more just like her. The council was silent. 6 months later, Grace returned to Earth. Her shoulder had healed, though she would carry the scar forever. She walked through the spaceport with her head held high past crowds of humans who recognized her face from the news. Some called her a hero. Some called her a survivor. She did not care about titles. Her younger brother met her at the gate. He was 12 years old, with the same dark hair and determined eyes as his sister. Were you scared? He asked as they walked toward home. Grace thought about it. She remembered the darkness, the red lights, the sound of claws on metal. She remembered the pain and the fear and the certainty that she was going to die. Yes, she said honestly. I was terrified. Then how did you win? Grace looked up at the sky. Night was falling, and the first stars were becoming visible. Somewhere up there, aliens who had once laughed at humanity were now speaking her name with respect. Somewhere up there, the galaxy was learning a lesson that Earth had taught long ago. Being scared does not mean you stop fighting, Grace said. It just means you are still alive. And as long as you are alive, you keep going. You keep fighting. You never give up. She put her arm around her brother and smiled. That is what being human means. Above them, the stars shone cold and bright. The universe was vast and full of dangers. But humanity was awake now. Humanity was watching, and humanity was not afraid anymore.